guys, I am here today to do a review for Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I'm really happy about this book. I think it was really well written. I would highly recommend it. Yeah, if you are wanting a good book that has some really good poetry in it, I would recommend it. There will be spoilers in this, so if you have not watched. If you've not read this book, I would recommend leaving because there are so many different parts of this book that are just so good. And if you watch this, you probably won't end up enjoying those parts as much as you would if you don't know them. So I'm going to get started with this. There will be spoilers, like I said, so leave if you want to. If you don't want to leave, stay. Okay, let's get started. I personally really like this. I think it's a great book. So let's talk about the main character, Will. Will is a really great protagonist for a story like this and what it's trying to accomplish. It is trying to tell the story of what it's like to live in a neighborhood that is like, this is not a great way of saying it, but many people would call this neighborhood like the ghetto part of town. And it's talking about what it's like to live in a neighborhood like that. And it's really well done. I think it's a great way of exploring these characters. So Will is just lost his brother in the story, and the whole entire story is just him going down the elevator on his way to go kill the person he thinks killed his brother, which is really great, cool thing, because there are not a whole lot of books that just don't move scenery very much, and just the characters and what's going on and what story they're telling is the only thing that changes. The only thing that changes is the floor of the elevator. After the probably about the first 50 pages, after that it's just the only part of scenery that changes is who is on the elevator. Ghosts from Will's past come on the elevator, and they all represent all these different things and different parts of his life, so that he has an idea of what could happen if he follows through with what he wants to do. So the first person that goes on the elevator is Buck, and Buck is a pretty good character. I think he was a pretty good one to start with because he was Sean's father figure when their father died, and although I don't think he's the best character in the book, I do think he's a really great one to start with because it's cool to see how everything goes together, and I think he was a great starting point to show that. Then after that is Danny, which is Will's childhood crush that died when they were on the playground when they were kids. And that, I really like her. I think she's probably one of my favorite characters. Sean is my favorite character, but she's one of my favorites. I just really like her story and how she died before innocence could be taken from her. So to be able to see her perspective on things was much different, and from the way that we saw Buck's. And it was really cool to have Buck and then have Danny's perspective right after that, because they're so different. And after that there is Uncle Mark, and Uncle Mark was also really interesting. Just his whole entire story with how he sold drugs and how that ended up killing him was a really interesting way of showing what people go through when they live in places like this, and how they can be put in bad situations that they can't really control. It was the only way for Uncle Mark to get a camera and to be able to support himself was to sell drugs. So it's just an interesting way of showing that. Then after that is Will's dad. I'm not going in order of the elevators. If I am, I'm not meaning to, I'm just naming off all the characters. Will's dad is was a really cool character. He was probably the best character after Sean, in my opinion. I think just his whole entire story and how he went through things very similarly to Will, because you can tell all these other stories and how they interact with Will and how this will affect Will, but I feel like Will's dad is really the one that just hits Will like with the most impact, I think is a good way of saying that, because he killed the person he thought killed his brother, just like Will wants to do with his brother. So it's a very similar story in how they dealt with it. Yes, they are at different ages and different parts of their lives, but just seeing how killing the guy that he thought killed Uncle Mark was, and how that affected him and didn't make him feel any better, I think was a really interesting way to show Will that even if he does follow through with this, it's not going to make the pain go away. And but without just him saying, hey, this isn't going to make the pain go away, it's explaining his story so that so that he has a better idea of what's going on instead of just saying that. The other thing, another person is the guy that killed Buck. That guy was pretty cool. He was probably my least favorite character because he didn't really matter that much. He just kind of, his chapter was kind of there and nothing really interesting happened in it. So I'm not really going to touch on his character. It just kind of was there. And then of course, Sean, which was definitely my favorite character of the whole entire book. I think Sean was a great way to end the book. It was a great way to show that from what I understood, in my perspective on Sean's character, it was a great way to show how the rules are not what makes you happy, because Sean breaks almost every single one of the rules in just that final chapter. Sean cries. Sean understands that getting revenge is not the answer. Just all of these things that had been talked about with the rules all throughout the book, and all of these people except maybe Danny had followed through with and made mistakes because they followed through with them, and that impacted their life in a negative way. It's a really cool way to have your final character understand that the rules are not a good way to live your life, so that can also show Will, because the big thing is that throughout the whole entire book is that Will feels like he has to follow the rules because that's what Sean said was the best thing to do, and Sean knew what he was doing. So having the person that Will looked up to so much explaining that the way he's living his life is not a good way to live his life and that it will cause many issues down the road was a really cool way to do it, and I really liked how they did it. So those are the characters. I'm now going to talk about the figurative language and the poetry in this book. There's a lot of figurative language, but it still has a cohesive story, which I like, because sometimes when you read poetry, it doesn't make any sense. At least to me. Whenever I read poetry, I'm like, what do they mean by this? What is the author trying to mean by this? But you kind of have an idea of what the author is trying to show you, because it's not just packed full of figurative language. It is, but that's not the only thing that's affecting him in this story. The figurative language is just a cool way to explain it. And although sometimes I personally thought the figurative language could be too much, and as someone who's not a big fan of poetry, it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. If you're trying to get into poetry, I would really recommend this book, because it's not just boring figurative language. It has a meaning behind it to tell this story, and it's an interesting story, which really helps. The overall theme, I think, was really interesting. How things that can be passed down are always the things that you should do. You should make your own decisions before you think about traditions and things like that. I I think that was really well done, and I liked how the author dealt with it. Um, yeah, I really liked that. I just like the overall story. I think the overall story of Will and all the other characters and them telling their stories on each one of the elevator levels, I think was done really well. They all connect, but they're all so different as well. You can tell why he's telling the story and why he's telling it, because it'll affect the way that Will finishes and how Will's ideas change over time, but I really like how they have those similarities, but you're not hearing the same story over and over and over again. Another thing that I know a lot of people can't probably would be annoyed with, but I think was a pretty cool way of ending it, is there's a cliffhanger. Normally I'm not a big fan of cliffhangers, but I think this really worked. I don't know. I don't know. I felt like it was a great way to just, what do you think happened? And that can be your headcanon. And I think this is a great book for it to happen because it would make sense either way. I personally am a person that doesn't think that he killed Riggs afterwards, but you can have your own opinion on it. And although sometimes I don't think cliffhangers are the best because I feel like it hurts the story with not having a final ending, but with this, I personally think it was really, really well written and it was a good idea for a cliffhanger because I think it just helped the overall story. So yeah, I feel that that was the most important things. I talked about the characters, the figurative language, the overall story, the cliffhanger. I Although there are some issues, mostly just with the poetry and poetry not being my favorite style of reading, I really liked this book. I did not choose reading this book. I had to read it for a class I was in, but for a book that someone else chose to read for me to read, I actually really liked it. It overall, I would recommend it, especially if you like poetry or if you're wanting to get into poetry. I would think this would be a great book. It's, if you're not a fan of poetry like myself, it's not going to be your favorite book, but it's not, I don't think you'll hate it either. So yeah, that is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. It's a pretty good book. I would probably mark it as like a 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10, somewhere in between there. It's above average. It's not amazing, but it's not horrible either. So, yeah, I would recommend it. It's a fun, enjoyable read. It's has a lot of emotion to it, and you can definitely tell that the author truly cared about the story that they were trying to tell. And yeah, I would recommend it to anyone. It's a good book, and as long as you don't expect it to be amazing or like mind blowing, yeah, I would recommend it. You'll have a good time with it. So it's been quite a long video, so I'm going to end it here. Thank you for watching this if you're still here. Thank you for watching this even if you're not here, but you won't hear this, but thank you. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I love you 3000 and stay safe. Bye guys.